7 men's stories, exciting entertainment.
The day the king fell. The French Revolution didn't start with a single event. It was a slow burn. Years of inequality, famine, and political paralysis led to an explosion. But how did a bread shortage ignite a revolution that toppled a monarchy? The answer lies in the perfect storm of anger and ideas. Chapter 1. The Powder Keg of Inequality. France in the 1780s was a country built on contradictions. Nearly 98% of the population, the Third Estate, shouldered the nation's taxes, while the 2% who made up the clergy and nobility lived in extravagance, exempt from financial burdens. This was the Ancien Régime, a system frozen in time where privilege trumped justice. The average laborer worked 14-hour days, earning barely enough to buy bread, while aristocrats debated fashion at Versailles. The numbers told a grim story. Jacques Necker, the finance minister, revealed half of France's budget went to servicing debt, much of it from wars and the court's excess. Marie Antoinette's wardrobe alone cost the equivalent of a worker's lifetime wages. Meanwhile, bad harvests sent grain prices soaring. Between 1787 and 1789, the price of bread doubled. People starved while Louis XVI's government borrowed more, deepening the crisis. Reform was impossible. The Parlement, powerful courts controlled by the nobility, blocked every attempt to tax the privileged classes. When the king proposed shifting some burden to the aristocracy, they refused, clinging to medieval exemptions. The system was rigged. The nobility held veto power over change, while the Third Estate had no voice. Frustration turned to fury. In 1786, a textile worker in Lyon earned just 25 sous a day. Not enough to feed his family? He wasn't alone. Across France, artisans and peasants smuggled pamphlets discussing Rousseau's social contract, which argued power belonged to the people, not kings. The idea spread like fire. If the system couldn't be fixed, perhaps it needed to be broken. By 1789, the king was desperate. He called the Estates General, France's ancient parliament, for the first time in 175 years. The Third Estate outnumbered the clergy and nobility combined, yet under the old rules, each estate had one vote, meaning the privileged two could always overrule the people. When commoners demanded fair representation, the aristocracy refused. On June 20th, locked out of their meeting hall, the Third Estate swore the tennis court oath they wouldn't disband until France had a constitution. The defiance shocked Versailles. Paris buzzed with rumors. Soldiers were coming to crush the assembly. The king would dissolve it by force. But the people had tasted possibility. Pamphlets circulated, quoting Voltaire's attacks on church corruption and Montesquieu's arguments for separated powers. For generations, French subjects obeyed. Now, they questioned. Meanwhile, the treasury neared collapse. Soldiers went unpaid, and inflation made bread unaffordable. In Rouen, rioters tore apart flour warehouses. Near Paris, peasants attacked tax collectors. The crown's authority crumbled, not from invasion or coup, but from decades of ignored warnings. The Ancien Régime didn't fall in a day. It collapsed slowly under the weight of its own contradictions, while the Third Estate watched, hungry and angry, waiting for their moment. By summer, Paris was a tinderbox. The king dismissed Necker, the only minister who still had public trust. Within hours, crowds filled the streets, chanting for reform. The powder keg was ready, It would only take a spark to ignite it, and that spark would come from a medieval prison called the Bastille. Chapter 2. The Spark That Lit the Fire. In July 1789, the price of bread reached 88% of a worker's daily wages. Parisians stood for hours in bread lines, sometimes leaving empty-handed. Many families survived on a single loaf per day, supplemented with rainwater and grass. The situation grew desperate enough that people chewed on leather and boiled wallpaper for sustenance. Meanwhile, over 2,000 carriages arrived daily at Versailles, delivering delicacies for royal banquets. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. When rumors spread that grain merchants were hoarding supplies to drive prices higher, mobs stormed bakeries across the city. On July 11th, Louis XVI made a fatal mistake. He dismissed Jacques Necker, the finance minister who had pushed for taxing the nobility. Necker was one of the few officials the people trusted. His removal sent shockwaves through Paris. Within hours, protesters clashed with royal troops in the Tuileries gardens. Print shops worked overnight, cranking out pamphlets warning of an aristocratic conspiracy to starve the population. By July 14th, a crowd of over 60,000 surrounded the Hôtel des Invalides, seizing 28,000 muskets and 20 cannons. But they still lacked gunpowder. At 10 a.m. that morning, nearly 1,000 armed citizens marched toward the Bastille, a medieval fortress that had become a hated symbol of royal tyranny. Its governor, Bernard-René Delaunay, commanded just 82 elderly soldiers and 30 Swiss guards. Yet when negotiators demanded the prison surrender, Delaunay stalled. The crowd grew impatient. Some climbed the outer walls and lowered drawbridges. After 4 hours of chaos, the garrison surrendered, but not before cannon fire killed over 90 rioters. What happened next became legend. The mob dragged Delaunay through the streets, stabbing him repeatedly before severing his head with a butcher's knife. They impaled it on a pike and paraded it through Paris. Violence spread quickly. That same evening, revolutionary leaders lynched the city's provost, accusing him of plotting with aristocrats. The Bastille's fall wasn't just about seizing weapons. It signaled that the monarchy's authority could be challenged and broken. Louis XVI received the news that night. When his advisor explained the situation, the king asked, "Is this a revolt?" The reply came, "No, sire, it is a revolution." Within days, royal troops began deserting en masse. Even elite regiments refused orders to suppress the uprising. In Versailles, nobles started packing their belongings, sensing the old order crumbling. The National Assembly moved quickly to consolidate power. On August 4th, they abolished feudal privileges overnight, ending centuries of noble exemptions. Weeks later, they issued the Declaration of the Rights of Man, asserting all citizens were equal before the law. For the first time, sovereignty officially resided with the people, not the king. The document spread through France, printed on cheap paper, read aloud in villages where most couldn't read. Peasants reacted with their own revolution. Armed with scythes and torches, they raided manor houses across the countryside, burning feudal records that bound them to labor obligations. In some regions, they hanged lords who resisted. By autumn, rural France had effectively dismantled the feudal system through direct action. Paris became the revolution's beating heart. Citizens organized neighborhood militias, wearing red and blue cockades, colors that would later form the French flag. They tore down royal symbols, replacing them with slogans like liberty or death. The king remained nominally in power, but real authority had shifted to the streets. When Louis XVI finally visited Paris in July 1789, protesters made him wear the revolutionary cockade. The message was clear. Even a monarch now answered to the people. By year's end, France had changed beyond a success recognition. Censorship collapsed, allowing hundreds of new newspapers to flourish. Political clubs debated the nation's future openly, and for the first time, ordinary people believed they could shape history, a belief that would soon be tested as foreign armies mobilized to crush the revolution. Chapter 3. From Revolution to Reign of Terror. By June 1791, Louis XVI had become a prisoner in his own palace. The revolution's early idealism gave way to suspicion, and the king decided to flee. On the night of June 20th, disguised as a servant, he boarded a carriage bound for the Austrian border. But near the town of Varennes, a postmaster recognized his face from coins. The royal family was captured and dragged back to Paris in disgrace. The escape attempt destroyed what little trust remained. Overnight, protest banners appeared across the city. Louis the traitor. Europe's monarchs watched with growing alarm. Austria and Prussia issued the Declaration of Pillnitz in August 1791, threatening military intervention to restore the French crown. The revolution now faced existential threats from both inside and outside its borders. Radical politicians like Maximilien Robespierre seized the moment, arguing that survival required extreme measures. Terror is nothing other than justice, he declared, prompt, severe, inflexible. The newly formed National Convention abolished the monarchy in September 1792. When documents surfaced proving Louis had secretly corresponded with foreign powers, his fate was sealed. On January 21st, 1793, guards led the former king through silent Paris streets to Place de la Révolution. As he tried to address the crowd, drummers drowned out his voice. The blade fell at 10:22 a.m. A witness described the scene. The youngest executioner lifted the head and showed it to the people. There were cries of "Vive la République" for at least 15 minutes. With the monarchy gone, radical factions took control. The Committee of Public Safety, led by Robespierre, instituted emergency measures. In September 1793, they passed the law of suspects, ordering arrests for anyone who by their conduct, relationships, or speech showed themselves to be supporters of tyranny. Neighbors informed on each other, sometimes to settle old scores. Prison populations swelled from 1,500 to over 8,000 in Paris alone. Revolutionary tribunals processed cases rapidly, often delivering verdicts within minutes. Guillotines worked 6 days a week. Religious traditions came under attack. Churches were renamed temples of reason, their altars destroyed. In Notre Dame, activists installed a statue of liberty wearing a Phrygian cap. The revolutionary calendar replaced saints' days with names like Day of the Plow or Day of the Apple. Authorities banned public worship and beheaded priests who refused to swear loyalty to the state. By mid-1794, executions reached 30 per day in Paris. The terror consumed its own creators. Moderate revolutionaries like Danton went to the scaffold pleading for mercy. Robespierre's grip tightened until July 27th, when convention members finally turned against him. During the Thermidor coup, guards shot him in the jaw during his arrest. The next day, he faced the same device he'd used against thousands. Witnesses noted the crowd cheered louder for his death than for Louis XVI's. The revolution had spiraled beyond control. Economic chaos followed the terror. Assignats, revolutionary currency, lost 99% of their value. Starvation returned to Paris as grain shipments collapsed. War with European powers dragged on, requiring ever more conscripts. This instability created an opening for an ambitious young general named Napoleon Bonaparte, who seized power in 1799. The revolution that began with cries for liberty ended with an emperor's coronation. Yet its ideas endured. Equality before the law, secular government, and national sovereignty became irreversibly embedded in modern politics. The terror demonstrated how quickly ideals could distort under pressure, leaving behind a question that still lingers. How much violence can be justified in pursuit of a better world? The French Revolution began as a fight for bread and became a global revolution in ideas. A king's fall, a people's rise, a decade of chaos. Paris in 1789 unleashed forces that rewrote history. But victory came at a terrible cost. Hope gave way to terror, then to dictatorship. Today, its contradictions still echo in every protest, every demand for rights, every fear of mob justice. Was bloodshed inevitable? Could liberty have been won without the guillotine? The revolution's lesson is simple. No system lasts forever. Oppress too long, refuse reform, and eventually, the powerless stop asking and start acting. Where that line falls, that's history's warning.
Feel free to follow this channel to avoid missing any new content. Disclaimer: the images are AI generated and are for illustration purposes. The stories on this channel are researched to the best of our knowledge.